Also, dudes out there, if you haven't been with like a really strong woman, like I mean physically strong, fucking do it, dude. It's the shit. It's the shit.
Do you wrap your legs around her waist and have her like, does she carry you to the bed, Gene?
Just pegs me every Tuesday.
Yeah, she just picks you up. She carries you like a baby and sits you down.
Remember when we first met John McClane? Argyle picked him up from the plane and took him down the Nakatomi Tower at the Christmas party. And the terrorists were overzealous, but it was sweet when they killed Ellis. And with a little help from Alan, John McClane kicked ass.
Welcome back to Shat the Movies, the podcast where we answer the question, were the movies we loved when we were growing up really that good? Have you ever caught yourself thinking, why don't they make movies like they used to? Can you still remember spending your Friday night searching for the perfect movie rental at Blockbuster Video? Do you know what Blockbuster Video is? If you answered yes, then this is the podcast for you. I am one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And each week, we take a look back in time and decide if our favorite films still hold up. The movies we cover are chosen by you, the listeners, who generously commission the films you love. If you like to sell the movies we have covered, will cover, and want to choose one for yourself, please visit shatpod.com and have a look. At the end of each podcast, we'll provide you, the audience, with the number of wipes each movie takes to get off your respective butts. So thank you so much for listening. If you have not already, hit that subscribe button and share with a friend. It's how we help the podcast grow. Additionally, subscribe to our sister podcast, Shat on TV. Review TV series such as Westworld, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, True Detective, Lovecraft Country, and Watchmen. Find all information and past episodes at shatpod.com/TV. And finally, to hang out with us live, follow and subscribe to our Twitch channel, shatpod.com/Twitch, and our YouTube channel, where we play video games, host watch parties, and edit this podcast live. All that being said, Big D, what movie are we reviewing tonight?
So, Gene, I will never give anything but love to our commissioners and the movies they pick. But sometimes these movies get strung together in a sequence that pushes us to our limits. If I had to see another explosion, another slow motion, like a round or a slow motion, somebody falling to the ground, or some high speed chase in a fire truck, or a boat explosion, I was going to fucking lose my mind, Gene. I was going to lose my mind. I needed something smaller, something quieter, something angsty, and that's what we got. And our great commissioner, James L., who's going to be a two-timer. This is his first film, and he has Street Fighter coming up early next year. He was kind. He gave me a reprieve. No more cowbell. I can't take any more cowbell. No more John Woo. No Michael Bay. Nothing. We got something very different, small budget, and it was just what I needed. So I was glad when he wrote in and commissioned the 1998 American comedy drama, SLC Punk.
And James L. in his debut commission wrote in and said, "Greetings, Shat crew. First off, thank you again for all of the endless hours of entertainment you have brought me and all the fellow listeners. I am a proud former video store clerk who spent several years working in a small mom and pop store in Southwest Michigan as a teen. This is where I first found SLC Punk as I was quietly setting up the new release wall on a Monday night after close. I took it home that night and fell in love. I was lucky enough to have an older cousin who for the previous few years had been feeding me regular doses of the Ramones, the Clash, Rancid, and all sorts of Chicago local punk and ska. I had the music, but thanks to SLC Punk, I had the template for how to look and act. This movie had my number. I dyed my hair purple. I started a punk band. When my sleepy beachside town tried to put in a curfew, I made flyers, hand-printed patches that said, "Fuck your curfew," but ultimately failed to stop the oppression of small-town government. I was punk and proud. I played in bands, bartended, but personally and professionally didn't amount to much. Then there was a day when I witnessed police inaction so heinous I lost sleep over it. I was pissed and for days couldn't stop talking about it. A coworker politely said, "What are you going to do about it?" And I said, "Fuck it, I'll be a better cop." So that's what I did. At 26, I went back to school. At 30, I started working at a sheriff's office in Northwest Indiana, and I've been forcing my punk rock ideals down my coworkers' throats ever since. Unity, compassion, change. This is what I'm fighting for, and I'm proud to say that I'm heavily involved in providing police officers training in how to deal with people in a mental health crisis, diverting them out of the criminal justice system and into the mental health system. The goal is to fundamentally change the crisis response system so the police aren't responding to calls they shouldn't. So in the end, did I sell out? Yeah, probably, but that is why life imitates art. Just like Stevo, I'm fighting the man from the inside and have reconciled with the fact that I've lost all my punk rock cred the second I put on a badge. I love this movie. In my heart, it's a zero wiper, but let's be real. The middle lags, there's no story for a while, and I can't wait to hear Gene's thoughts on the fight sequence. I hope you all enjoy it and come in around a 2 or 2.5 wipes for this. Much love, James.
I'll bet you that James is not 100% on like the code for the uniform. You know, he's got some patch. He's got some pin on somewhere underneath. He is modifying, especially when he was 26. He had to be showing his rebellious side somewhere on that uniform.
Now, James and I have had some back and forth. As you guys know, I have a pretty strong anti-police stance. And it's good to see that there are officers like James who are in there trying to make some changes, understanding that not every emergency call requires an armed response. I respect that greatly. And with guys like James, with guys like Kenny, I'm finding myself one by one making a few cop friends, aside from the ones that train at my gym. And I really, really appreciate this commission. James also wrote in and asked if we had heard from Tom in Texas in a while. He says that Tom's voicemails remind him so much of having conversations with customers at the video store. He just sounds like a nice old guy who likes to talk about movies. And James would be the first to donate to a community commission for Tom if Tom is still listening. So James, I hope you heard recently we did Suburban Commando for Tom. He is still very much a listener. He switched cities, but he's still listening out there. And I'm sure he would take you up on that offer.
Yeah, and sadly, Tom had like a little health turn to where I think his eyesight had started to go. So he's a little harder to get around, a little harder to communicate. So hopefully if we can find a way to communicate to make it easier for him, because he is great. He's one of the listeners who stands out, who I remember the first time we heard him. And yes, we hope we have him for a long time.
Well, SLC Punk is a 1998 comedy written and directed by James Merendino. The film centers around Stevo, played by Matthew Lillard, a college graduate and punk living in Salt Lake City during the mid-1980s. Merendino created the film based on his experience growing up in SLC, and although the film is not autobiographical, Merendino has said that many characters were based on people he knew. Big D, I grew up on the goth and punk scene starting around age 14, so that would have been about 1994. But 1998, that was the year that I became an adult. And to give you a picture of a young Gene prior to this year, right? I was this strange mix of the kid who was going to goth clubs, but also running the flag up the pole at school every day, sometimes in a skirt, mixing up best of both worlds, like James, intensely patriotic. And 1998 was a big year of change for me. I started to see the world in a little bit different way. And I knew at that point that I wanted to be a different kind of adult. Like the game plan there was graduate high school, go to college, leave Arizona, and never grow up to be a suburbanite like my mom, like the rest of my family, right? I wasn't going to own a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house with a garage in suburban Arizona. And watching this movie at 18, seeing my little world of subcultures set against a Southwestern backdrop, it felt incredibly relevant at the time. So I rushed to get SLC Punk on DVD, and much like James, I just ate it up from the start.
So I'm going to look at this in like 2 time frames. In 98, I had graduated college. I was going into the military. So in that time frame, I didn't see it, but it takes place in the mid 80s, which was my youth, when I was in high school, grade school, middle school. And you remember in the part of the movie where they give the pecking order, the hierarchy of who preys upon who? I was the very bottom. I was the new wave kid who was he was the bottom feeder. He's the one to get picked on. There's a line in this in the mall where he makes fun of Morrissey and the Smith fans. That was me. I was the kid who like was angsty like Morrissey. And so when this commission came in from James, I was so oblivious to it. I didn't even know the SLC was Salt Lake City. I thought it was some like punk acronym. Like I didn't know it was going to mean something within the punk subculture. But I have never been a real big fan of coming of age films. They usually annoy me, like Pump Up the Volume. And I hear people like chanting like talk hard. It makes me want to fucking gag. I don't like these kids trying to find their inner like personality and their self-expression. And the parents don't understand. And, they don't remember what it's like to love and to live. And I do like 80s and 90s, the popular, where it was more traditional, like middle of the road kids. Breakfast Club, Dazed and Confused, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. The extremes, it just never appealed to me. But when this came in, I was willing to give it a chance because I could not take any more crashes, explosions, 45, 50 police officers dying. I couldn't take it.
All right, we got to do something. Let's hit the trailer.
I love living in the city.
Meet Stevo and Bob. They were the only two punks living in Salt Lake City.
Ooh, we come from the East.
What the hell are you?
We're from England.
England.
That's probably why we seem so weird to you, man.
Their only way to understand the world was to be totally misunderstood. And when you're living in the most conservative city in America, do you A, conform?
This rebellion thing you're going through, I understand it, not completely, but I respect it.
B, learn to cope?
I am the future. I am the future of this great nation.
Steven, I didn't sell out, son. I bought in.
Or C,
Is he gonna be okay?
Oh, yeah, he'll be fine, I'm sure. Thank you, though.
none of the above?
I am Aladdin, and this is my lamp. I wished for you, and here you are.
Bob was in love.
You're like a poet, dude. I just started thinking, Salt Lake ain't that bad. I know, I know it sucks and all, but, this is like home,
Matthew Lillard, star of Scream and She's All That. And Michael Goorjian in a film about living life.
If I knew what was ahead of me, I may have stayed in bed. Life is like that.
Never have so many of Satan's followers been amassed on the earth as there are now.
What?
And getting out alive.
666. The mark will be on all of them.
Oh, my God!
With attitude.
I told you those boys were trouble.
What's your major gonna be?
I want to save the rainforest. Somebody's got to fight for them.
Salt Lake City Punk.
In the fall of 1985, Stevo and his best friend Heroin Bob are punks living in Salt Lake City. Stevo and Bob go from party to party while living in a dilapidated apartment. They spend most of their time fighting with members of other subcultures, particularly rednecks. Stevo has a casual relationship with a girl named Sandy, while Bob is in love with Trish, the owner of a head shop.
So the little I knew about this film, I knew it was small, I knew it was indie, I knew it was very niche, but I did not know it was a $600,000 budget. This may be the smallest. I think next to maybe Student Body Count was a small one.
Student bodies.
Well, I just remember the bing, bing, all the counts. But yeah, $600,000. You've got some actors who became stars in this. You have Christopher McDonald, Shooter McGavin. He had to have gotten maybe 40, 50 grand for his small part. So $600,000. My expectations are low. I'm not expecting that this is going to be something that is cinematic. I'm not expecting a lot of skilled, important people in the crew, director, cinematographer, but I expected it to be at least competent, and it was getting there. And then as the movie goes on, there's some weird things in the structure of the story that had me wondering if there were issues, because it's not a traditional linear story. We don't meet the group of friends, like Superbad in the beginning, and that they're on a quest to get beer and get laid. Here, they're jumping back and forth. It's non-linear. But there's a point where we get to the first party. And then Stevo starts introducing all the people. He's like, well, hey, this is Trish, and this is Sandy, and that's Sean, and that's Mike. We've already met these people. I had this feeling like at some point this movie had to be shuffled around. Things were put in different orders. And it was weird because it didn't seem to all fit together cohesively like I was expecting it to.
I totally agree with you there, but I have to say I enjoyed meeting all of the characters at this party. It really spoke to the semi-autobiographical nature of this film. Like James Merendino had said that he based this on a lot of people he knew, and that part rings true because these people at the party, the people we meet through the movie, they reminded me so much of the goths, the punks, the mods, the rockers I knew in my youth. And those people were so memorable. And that's what hit so hard about this movie is that there are people I work with right now. There are people at my gym who I've known for years. And I either forget that they even exist or I won't remember them a few years from now. But those kids from my youth who were in those specific subcultures, I can remember them clear as day. To this day, the King Bee, he can mention guys like Handsome Dan or Boxcar Bob or the Caston Smith twins or Genevieve from IHOP, the Shuffle Pirate or Skinhead Derek. I remember those characters. And so seeing these guys in this movie brought it all back to me in a very, very strong way. And the one that stood out the most was Mike. And to an outsider, to a person who didn't live this life, to a person who might have had a more sheltered upbringing, Mike might seem a bit far-fetched, right? He's this nerdy looking giant. Okay. He's speaking sweetly to kids at the hospital. He's like, oh, does that hurt? Are you okay? He's a wallflower at shows, right? While Heroin Bob and Stevo are fucking and jumping into crowds, you've got Mike. He's just kind of sitting off to the side, hands in his pockets, nodding his head, enjoying the music. But I assure you, this dude is really real. And the King Bee and I, we grew up with two of them, Leroy Clough and Joshimus Prime. Okay. These dudes were not to be fucked with. They wore glasses. They wore fitted jeans, polo shirts, sensible shoes, didn't talk a whole lot. But Leroy's sister, okay, to give you an idea of how big this guy is, to this day, she is taller and tougher than I am. And I was a goth, but I was willing to fight anybody on the scene any day of the week. I was looking for fights. There were three people I wouldn't fuck with, the King Bee and these two guys. When these guys decided they were going to smash something up, or like we're going to shoot a potato gun at a car or kick someone's ass at a party, you didn't argue. You didn't get in the way. You got out of the way. You hope nobody died. And this was 100% real. I can't believe a character like this exists in a movie. It's like when you open a page in a book and there's a passage that dives straight into your mind.
But I are these really their names? Is
Leroy
this really
Clough and Joshimus Prime?
Did you have Handsome Dan? Is that real?
Oh yeah,
Boxcar
Handsome
Bob?
Dan. Yeah, those are all real people.
This sounds like the fucking, like all the prisoners on the jailbird in Con Air. That's what it sounds like. Hey, I got to go get Boxcar Bob.
Okay. So Boxcar Bob does not like being called Boxcar Bob anymore. He's Bob Gibson. He works at the tattoo shop in Phoenix right now. He's cleaned up a lot. He doesn't drink anymore. Boxcar
Why
Bob.
Boxcar?
He had messed up teeth when we were all younger. His teeth were kind of rotting and stuff. And so they said he looked like he was living in a boxcar. And it's just kind of dirty.
Okay. Yeah. The Cass Smith twins?
The real twins? They're actual twins, yeah.
Like fraternal or
identical? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so I believe that Genevieve, she must have worked at IHOP.
She worked at IHOP, yeah.
Okay, Handsome Dan, was he handsome or ugly?
Handsome Dan, incredibly good-looking guy. Very suave, always well-dressed.
Did people think he was gay?
No. Unlike SLC Punk, they did not think Handsome Dan was gay. Everyone was very sure of his heterosexuality.
Yeah, I mean, you had cooler friends than I did. I didn't have a friend named like Skinhead Derek. I didn't have any of these. I just had Rob and Vinny. Very simple. Yeah. I was, nothing exciting like you. And
maybe it's your fault for not giving him better nicknames.
I think so. I think if you have a better nickname, you have to live up to it.
Right.
So it's true. Now I have people who have some nicknames, and as you get older, you try to steer away from those. But you had warned me, man, when this we were talking about this before I watched it, and you said, be prepared. There's going to be a lot of Matthew Lillard's face very close in the screen. He's going to be phlegmy. He's going to be spitting the corners of his mouth. And you were not joking. Even with your warning, I was not prepared for the amount of face time he gets. He's predominantly in the middle of the screen. And they do that. It's like almost like they remove frames. So it's not a very smooth transition. There's a lot of jerky motion. It's, maybe it was they were trying to be edgy with what they could do for the budget. And it is a lot of fourth wall breaking. We've gotten it before in these angsty. You got Ferris Bueller. He used to talk to us. Mm-hmm. He would turn and say, hey, Cameron really isn't sick, but, he's just having a problem because of his parents, and I got to get him out. I like that. You dabble, you pull us in and out of the story. This is almost 100% fourth wall breaking. Steve is talking to us almost the entire time. When he's talking to the people around him, it's a more rare occasion. And it was a bit odd because I felt there was some message being hidden in it. Almost as if we were seeing the visualization of Stevo as an adult sitting with his therapist, talking about his youth and explaining why he was so fucked up.
Now, this could have been worse. Okay, they could have just had extensive voiceover and not have him talking directly to us. So you'd be watching what's going on and then have the voiceover. I hate when movies do that, where it's just hours and hours of voiceover. Looking at you, Ray Liotta. But no matter the role he's playing, Matthew Lillard always seems incredibly pleased with himself. So despite being way too close to his face, despite the spittle in the corners of the mouth, excusing all of that, he's just incredibly pleased with himself, whether it's this movie or Hackers. And that's not a bug. That is a feature of his performances. Like, he's kind of known for that. But what I found fascinating was the way I feel about the jokes he was making in this movie when he's actually trying to be funny. It's changed as I've grown older. Okay. When I was 18 years old, I thought Steve-O's commentary was super clever. It was super funny. Like, he was taking shots at the man. He was making fun of these subcultures. He was the cool guy in the room. Big D, I got to tell you, at 44, as an adult, it just feels like he's trying so hard to impress. And I wonder if that's not intentional, right? It's a movie that you see differently as you get older, where that cool factor just seems lame now because there's just so much of it.
But I mean, it gets even worse. I have this problem with Clerks, where you know that they thought they were being really witty and the conversations that no normal people have. Here, think of the time. These were young kids writing dialogue for young kids. They didn't understand what it was like to really grow up and to look back with 40, 50 years of experience and perspective. But Matthew Lillard, he's made a career out of being unlikable. In every movie, this might be the most likable he is. Think about him in Scream. I'm dying over here. He's a fucking dick in everything.
Hold on. He was very likable as serial killer. Or no, was he serial killer? No, he was, serial killer.
Yeah, he was one of them. There was two of them. It was him and...
No, what are you talking about? No, in Hackers.
Oh, I was thinking... No, in Scream, there was two killers. He was one of the serial
killer with a C.
Ah.
Yeah, no, he was likable as serial killer.
I don't think he's ever been really likable. Nothing. He always plays that asshole. He does it well, and he's got a punchable face. And I don't think he's as proud of himself as he is like, thank God I got another job. I'm happy to be acting. This is going to lead to something someday.
Yeah, all $10,000 he made for this movie.
No, dude, he's still acting.
No, I meant for this movie.
I know, but he's become less selective. He's doing some shit now, but he's a lot of Scooby-Doo in his following years.
Well, Stevo and Bob are shaped by their experiences with their parents. Stevo's parents, now divorced, are former hippies who sold out by becoming affluent Reagan Republicans, which they try to justify. Stevo's father sends an application to Harvard Law School, and Stevo is accepted but declines because of his beliefs. By contrast, Bob's father is a mentally ill alcoholic who mistakes his son and Stevo for CIA operatives and chases them away with a shotgun when they visit him on his birthday.
So you just mentioned it. When you watch these movies when you're young, you're always associating with the kids. You're taking the kids' perspective against the parents. Now we're the establishment, Gene. Now we're the gatekeepers. We're the man. We're the parent. And I have a completely different view of it. And that's why lately I've started to hate like the teen rebellion movies where it's all teen angst and, oh, my parents don't understand. We fucking understand. Emma tries to come up with some shit. She's 8 years old. I'm like, Emma, that doesn't work. I know what you're doing. I can see what your intent is. And she thinks like we have no clue. I'm like, parents understand. We were kids. We didn't forget about what it was like to be young. You know, pump up the volume. I hate it because you had wealthy kids complaining about, oh, life is so hard. Meanwhile, oh, I got my Jeep and my $50,000 amplifier, and I got my basement apartment, and I'm going on vacations with my parents. You don't have real problems. Here, the kids have legit problems. Steve's parents are divorced. They're giving him conflicting points of view and advice on what they expect and what they want. There's hostility there. Bob's father is a mess. He is obviously psychotic, delusional. He needs medication, needs help. He's an alcoholic. They're both having problems, but they don't sit around all day belly aching about their parents and how it's not their fault and they can't wait to get out. These kids have problems and they just kind of suck it up and deal with it. They move on. It's something that's shaping them. It's not their fault. And I liked it. It was a change from what we traditionally get, which is the parents are the problem. And these kids, just once they get out of the house, they'll be okay.
Another thing that I've seen in my own life that is demonstrated in this film is this idea that compassionate parenting is okay, that kids will come around. All the kids that I grew up with, right? No matter how countercultural we were, no matter how deep into our respective subcultures we went, eventually we came around, right? And I see those guys now, and they're working out, they got good jobs, you know, they're married, they got kids. Like everybody came around to their parents' point of view. Now, not maybe in lockstep, right? My mom and I don't agree on everything, but the fact is that I like hanging out with her, right? I get who she is. I understand where she's coming from. My mom always told me there's no playbook, right? You just love your kids, honestly love them, they'll be okay. And I still find myself at this age, at 44, right? My mom has no control over me. I'm my own person. But when I'm going to make a decision, I ask myself, would this hurt my mom? Right? Not out of force, not out of fear. I just don't want to hurt my mom, and I make decisions accordingly. And that comes from love, right? And so I'm not saying it works 100% of the time. I'm not saying people whose lives are tough didn't have parents who love them. But I do believe firmly now, and I see it in this movie where, like Shooter McGavin being nice to Stevo, right? You just keep trying. You keep that open hand there. You keep caring and try to show them the path. And eventually, they come around.
As parents, you expect adversity. You've been through it. You know that, yes, it sucks in the moment, but it does help shape who you are. If everything is handed to you, I don't know that you value it as much. When I work for something, if I saved up as a kid, I remember that Huffy I bought for $50. I had to cut grass. I had to paint the railing of my neighbor's house because I earned it. You give him a little tough love, and Steve's daddy's there. He's there for him. He's cool. He doesn't say, hey, you got to fill out your application to Harvard. He does the hard work. He knows he's full of shit. Yeah, you really don't care, Steve. Then why did you try? Why did you make an effort to cheat? I know what you want. I'm going to help get you there. And dad's cool. He's got a good rapport with his son. I think he helps him come around at the end, because he's been there for him and hasn't just continued to pound on him.
Can we talk about perhaps the most unlikable thing Steve-O does in this movie? So his dad picks him up. They're cruising around in the Porsche, right? He gives him shit about, Porsche being a German car and they're Jewish and why that's an issue. They go to this nice restaurant. They sit down. I think it's like their country club, right? They sit down. They're having a meal, right? Shooting the shit, dad and son. They allowed Steve-O in there looking the way he does, fully punk rock, right? He's still got to give shit to the other diners, right? If I went into, I don't know, an Italian restaurant, right? And I was dressed like I am now, right? Giant mustache, Diamondbacks hat, and people stared at me because of my giant mustache, I'd be like, yeah, I understand that. Like, I'm not going to make a scene. I chose to have this. Like, I'm wearing an attention-getting ensemble, and I don't know. That really turned me sour on Steve-O.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be too self-aware or care, but Dad seems to have a little power in Salt Lake. He moved from New York. His dad maybe has some ability to sway the people, and Steve knows he can do it. Steve's not afraid he's going to embarrass Dad. Dad doesn't worry about what the snooty people in the country club are going to think. So he does it. He keeps waiting for him to come around. He goes, what are people going to think? What statement are you making with that hair? The dad approaches it right. And I've been to Salt Lake City twice in my life. So I don't pretend to know it inside and out. It's kind of a weird place. It's downtown seems very spread out. There's a lot of tech there now, and it seems to be growing. Seems to be a lot of gentrification of downtown. Oddly, Salt Lake City has become like the epicenter, Gene. You might not know this, of like the YouTube parenting or like kids channel craze.
Makes a lot of sense.
The Ninja Kids. There's 4 or 5 huge like kids channels where they're making tens of millions a year. They just had one of these moms who teaches everyone how to raise their kids get arrested for abusing her kids because it was like harsh punishment. The dad's in jail. These are all Salt Lake parents. And Salt Lake back in like the 80s, whatever it is today, back then, it looked like shit. I would not want to grow up there. They show Wyoming and they describe Wyoming as like desolate and a cold, lonely, miserable place. Salt Lake City looks the same. What is there? It's cold. You got the Mormon churches running everything, so you can't even get high alcohol beer. It's hard enough growing up in a big city, Gene, to find a little group to fit into. If you start putting like kids into these little rural towns where they're only one type of kid, I think it's got to be so much harder to grow up in a place without options.
Listen, I don't mean to diss the flyover states. Okay. I lived in Lima, Ohio for 5 years.
I've
Kids,
been there.
if you're out there and you're listening, okay, you don't have to live in these places. when you become an adult, you can go to better places. It's no coincidence that the United States stretches from one coast to another, plus Alaska, Hawaii, and territories, right? And we can't have holes in the middle that aren't the United States, right? So we had to kind of accept those states too. Doesn't mean they're great. Doesn't mean there's anything going on there. Doesn't mean you have to be there. You can get out. It's okay. No one will judge you. Getting back to Salt Lake City, my former sparring partner and current Chop Top Challenge teammate, Chad, whom you've met at my wedding, he's former LDS. Okay. He grew up Mormon. He graduated from BYU. And he used to own a home in Salt Lake City, which he just recently sold. Okay. So a couple years back, before Sarah and I were an item, he invited us and some other friends to visit Salt Lake City. And his pitch was this. It's not just the church, right? It's not what you think. There are amazing restaurants. There are breweries. There's scenery, amazing nature. There's bakeries. And he was right about the latter two. There is scenery and there are bakeries. The breweries, they could do better. We're not talking Colorado. This is the Pacific Northwest either. It's not Michigan. They have some breweries in the fact that there are some places that make beer. The mountains around Salt Lake City, pretty nice. The Great Salt Lake itself, terrible. And the bakeries are pretty legit. But you have to understand this when you go to Salt Lake City. Mormons, LDS, right? They are obsessed with baked goods and ice cream. Like, if you like baked goods and ice cream, it's the place to go. Have you hung out with LDS before, Big D, and witnessed this?
No.
Dude, they eat sweets at a rate I have never seen among any other people. Like, it is wild. Every day, it's ice cream, candy, and like cookies, donuts, cake, everything.
Well, I mean, they got to reward themselves.
Right.
I didn't even ask Chad about soaking. Is soaking a real thing?
Soaking, I don't know. Chad doesn't soak. I know that for sure. That guy fucks.
Not now.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can be raised to think it's not sex or premarital sex if you place your penis inside of the vagina and don't move it in or out. You just sit there. But you can have someone else shake the bed, then it doesn't count as a sinful act. So they're very special people. But
yeah, I think soaking is an urban myth, much like a sex sandwich with two women and a man.
I don't think either one is. Well, we'll have to ask Chad.
All right,
he'll know.
Well, Stevo begins to see the drawbacks of living the punk life when at this point in the movie, Stevo begins to see the drawbacks of living the punk life. Sean, a fellow punk, was a drug dealer who once attempted to stab his mother while under the influence of an entire 100-dose sheet of acid. In the present, Stevo finds him panhandling on the street with some obvious mental issues.
So I'm going to give you like a status report. The movie started off, I was not optimistic. I was getting Clerks vibes. I was having a hard time staying engaged. I was having a hard time liking the people. Yes, they were eccentric. They were fun, but I wasn't caring about any of them. And at about this point in the movie, it starts to shift where we're going to get Steve is actually going to develop. He's going to grow. He's going to start to question his life. And it starts at this moment when he meets Sean. Sean, yes, he tripped out. He had the acid in his pocket. He pulls the knife on his mother. He is panhandling. He's lost. And you can see that Steve, for the first time, he feels bad. He feels awkward. He doesn't know what to do. It's no longer fun. The games that you play when you're young and careless and carefree, it's not the same anymore. And he's starting to feel like he's separating from the group because the group is starting to break up. Everybody's got their group of friends that you party with, say in your mid-20s, I think, to where everybody starts to make a little bit of money. You're figuring out what your career will be. You're maybe after college. You're young, reckless. You think you're going to live forever. And then slowly, one by one, you got the friends who will either get married, they'll have a kid, they'll move away for a job, they'll separate. Here we get Mike goes to Notre Dame. He's going to study botany. Bob, spoiler, he passes away. Mark is gone back to Miami. And it just made me think of my personal life, the group of friends that I had who would party. And there's the 1-2 who never want the party to end. So you slowly become the oldest guy in the group. And then there's new younger people. And before you know it, I have 1 or 2 friends who I see them posting where they're out at the club at 45, single, still living that life, still trying to hold on. And there's a little sadness in their eyes. And I don't want to judge them, because if they're doing it and they enjoy it, it just doesn't look it to me. And it's got to be so sad to be that one last friend that you suddenly turn around, you're 40, and you're like, where did everybody go?
Yeah, Keeby always brings up that "remember when" is the saddest phrase in the English language, right? Like, I really don't like when I hang out with my friends from high school or elementary school or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, remember when we used to?" Like, no, we're doing stuff now, man. Like, there's real stuff happening right now that is infinitely more interesting than the shit we were doing then. But there is one dude, a friend of mine, Alan Hunt, who I think you met as well at my wedding. He was at the Hallow wedding as well. And this guy breaks the mold. Alan still has parties at his house. Like, he'll have like pool parties for like 4th of July or whatever, or he'll host like Suns games, like on the big screen in his backyard. And he invites the same dudes from like junior high school, but Al's married. He's a tour manager for Killswitch Engage. So he's like on tour all the time. So he's still like doing this incredible job of balancing, like still being that guy that was in bands, that was on tour, that was doing all that stuff, but at the same time being mature enough to at least own his own home, get married and do those things. And I think that's the ticket. That's the way you do it.
No, I'm not saying that guy, because that guy, I'm talking about the guy who can't throw a party, the guy who shows up drunk and passes out or throws up on your couch and doesn't have a job, doesn't have an idea of what he wants to do. That's awesome. Because I tell people all the time, like, I went on a cruise recently and I was sitting at the bar with like 3 or 4 other people in their late 40s, watching the younger people. We were all pounding drinks. Everyone else was trying so hard. And our group was just kind of sitting there drinking, having a good old time, and realizing how with age, the fun doesn't have to stop. You can have a different level of fun to where shit doesn't bother you. You're confident. If you don't like the place, you pick up and move. It's good to get old. It's good to have fun. But when you're trapped in a spot where you can't really enjoy it, it's got to feel just awful.
Big D, I've never done acid. I know you certainly have. And in this scene, this guy, Sean, he's running from security at the school, and he runs through some sprinklers. It gets that sheet of acid wet on his leg, and that causes him to trip. From what I understand of acid, that's not a method of administering LSD. You can't just soak it in through your leg skin, especially not 100 hits of it with sprinklers.
I think also through the pants. I think that would be an issue.
Through the pants.
I think you probably could. If you had 100 sheets and I stuck them on you like a stamp, I would believe you'd have to get some effect. I don't know that you'd go crazy and think your mom was a bull and try to stab her, but yeah, I don't think it would be fun.
And part of the reason I probably don't know that answer is that I've never really been that curious about acid. That might have something to do with the movies that we saw in the 80s and 90s. Okay. Acid never, ever seems like a good time in movies. Easy Rider, that was a bad trip, right? Fear and Loathing, bad trip. Apocalypse Now, Almost Famous. They never make it look like a good time. And we get 2 acid scenes in SLC Punk. There's one where Sean, who by the way is Devin Sawa, he gets 100 hits melted into his leg, chases his mom around, as you mentioned, with a knife, and there's Satan in the house, and she's turned into a bull. There's this other one, though. After seeing Sean, Stevo feels bad about it. What's the solution? I don't know. Let's go to the park and drop acid, right? So this scene, there's rivers of blood running down the hill. He's freaking out. He's hearing things. And it ends with Sandy standing on a hill. And in the background, it's the nuclear Armageddon scene from Terminator 2. Okay. I got to ask, my only impressions from film, and it's never bad and it's always bad, is LSD actually any fun?
Oh, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, but you have to be sensible with it. And I think each person is different. I had a few years where I was heavy into hallucinogens. Mushrooms, I loved. Acid, I loved them. But you got to be careful, because acid, you would trip for a while. So you could not risk. 2 rules I had. You had to like the people you were with on a core level. You had to be cool with them, because if you start tripping and they start acting out, it amplifies every emotion you have for them. So if somebody's having a bad time, you don't like them, they're acting up or they're being an asshole, it makes you get like a negative vibe. Then the likelihood of you having a bad experience just doubles and triples. You also have to be comfortable in what you're wearing and where you are. So if you're wearing comfortable clothes and it's a comfortable environment, yeah, it's fun. It's great. I'm not with Sandy sitting out in the park talking about cannibals and the Donner Party. This bitch will bring any fucking buddy down. I would not trip out with her. But as long as you are carefree, I couldn't do it now. Again, because I'm uptight. I couldn't relax to the fact where I could just be carefree, lay on the ground. I remember we used to lay on the ground and look up at the clouds, or we would walk out in the fresh snow. I was reminiscing with a friend. We took a bus to spring break in Florida. We took a hit of acid 3 hours before we got on the bus going back to New York and tripped for a full half ride up the East Coast. That's a bad idea, Gene.
Yeah.
That could have gone horribly wrong, but it didn't. We took acid and went to Great Adventure in New Jersey, the amusement park. That could have gone very bad, but it didn't. So I think it's a mix of who you are, where you take it, who you're with. But I think once you have a bad experience, I don't know you would ever be able to go back. But luckily, I didn't have any really bad ones.
I think there's some truth to what you said, too, because there's so much more on your mind at our age than there was back then. Because you're right. I used to take ecstasy or eat mushrooms at the most random times. State fair? Fuck it. Let's do some ecstasy. Getting on a flight. Let's eat some mushrooms. Why not? Some of the dudes brought mushrooms on the Chop Top Challenge. Like, we're driving cars with no top at 80 miles per hour in unknown places and going on ferries across water in Lake Michigan. Seems like a really bad time to be doing shrooms.
Yes.
But back then at 18, 21, fuck yeah, I don't care. Let's do it anytime.
Yeah. The freedom that ignorance gives you is like nothing else.
Big D, I know you're not a fan of bad behavior. It bothers you in film. So I want to bring this point up about SLC Punk. So for the most part, SLC Punk, it accurately captures the mentality and the motivation of the punk subculture, right? The way punks actually act in America. But I couldn't understand why characters kept being unrealistically antagonistic, like to the point where it's no longer a part of direct action, to the point where you're not making a statement, you're just being a dick. Like, if you want to throw underground parties and beat up Nazis, hell yeah. You want to drop acid in the park, you want to paint your van, I'm into it. But there's a scene, they drive hours to Wyoming to buy beer because they don't want that shitty Utah beer, okay? They get there, they've got the beer. Yeah, they're getting weird looks, but it's Wyoming, whatever. You just buy the beer and you leave. But no, they got to show their ass to everybody. They got to antagonize the liquor store owner. He's got to scream, fuck you at his parents. I just don't get it.
No, and I don't understand it either. And we'll talk about this later with like counterculture groups.
Yeah.
All the counterculture groups, unless you have some aversion to that specific group, maybe the young Nazis would not want to hang out with the African-American kids. I got it. Other groups, why are you hating each other? Embrace each other. Create like the Legion of Doom of misfit kids. Let's have it be like what was it, the Warriors? Let's have a meeting with Cyrus. We'll get all of them. The what are they? The little moped kids. We'll get those guys.
Mods.
The mods. We'll get the mods. We'll get the rockers. We'll get the goth kids. You could create a powerful group within the social fabric of kids' lives.
And that's what I'm saying. Yeah. In Arizona, there was a night. It was called Area 51 and Panic. Okay. Same club, 2 different rooms. There was a door adjoining them. One side was a Britpop night. All the mods were over there. The new wave kids were over there. On the other side, it was a goth industrial night. We all got along. We all hung out. You would go back and forth between the rooms. It was no big deal. Everybody was chill. The punk rockers, they showed up too. Nobody gave a shit. That's how it really was. We weren't going around to Circle K and screaming at the clerks and breaking shit.
Okay, so you didn't judge any of the other groups?
No, we judge them. I mean, well, let's say you don't judge them, and you might poke fun, right? But it's all in good. It's all in good humor. Like, nobody was fighting.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
No. Well, Stevo understands that his relationship with Sandy is casual. He discovers her having sex with another man at a party and savagely beats him, loathing himself because his action contradicts his own belief in anarchism. Stevo's social circle begins to drift away. His dealer, Mark, and his friend Mike both leave Salt Lake City. And soon after, Stevo attends a party and falls in love with a rich girl named Brandy, who points out that his clothing and his hair are just fashion as opposed to true rebellion. Rather than being offended, Stevo takes the criticism thoughtfully and they passionately kiss. So you mentioned Big D earlier that Mark goes away to Miami. And we should take a second to talk about Mark. Mark is a European guy. He's the drug dealer. He's a little bit weird. He's very, very rich. His family died in a plane crash. And as I'm watching this, much like Mike, I started thinking, shit, isn't it weird that every group of friends, no matter what era you grew up in, no matter where you grew up, there's always this guy like Mark. He mysteriously comes into some money. He has all this cool shit at his house and he wants to show it off. But whenever you're there, you want to leave as soon as possible. And I don't think the movie made a mistake by including Mark. Mark is an interesting character. There's a great scene where they dump a stolen car into the Great Salt Lake and it won't sink. And he's like, why won't you sink, you fool? But Mark did get like an inordinate amount of screen time in this movie. It just kept going on and on. It was like the action scene at the end of Face Off, only to then just have this guy leave. And I wish that they had done the smart thing and kept Mark on the periphery, like Mike and Freaky Deaky, people who are only in the movie for a few minutes.
I didn't feel like he was around that much. I mean, he's the older guy in the group. I think he's German. Did we believe?
I thought he was Dutch, but yeah, probably German.
He was whatever he was, but he was cool. He was the older dude. And yes, I've had that friend. I had the friend, and his nickname was Klinger in college because he was crazy. Yes, he was in, I think, the Marines for a couple years, came out, failed out of school, and started working one of the boiler rooms in Long Island and selling stock, like penny stock, and made big money, dude. And he was hanging out with us still in college. He never graduated, and he would come in and drop 5-10 grand. But he was also the guy who'd come in with guns and be like, hey, let's go out and shoot. Let's go out. And he would get drunk and drive his car like crazy and would do nutty shit. Hey, let's all get high and go parachute. We're like, no, we're not trained. He's like, oh, it's okay. I got you. You know, everyone had that weird friend, but they were so needy underneath. Yeah. You know, that you'd have to sit there and listen to the spiel about all this stuff they got. And, you know, but more than that. So I think also everybody had the mic. The preppy or the kid who looked like he had everything under control. He looked buttoned up, came from a good family, seemed to have his shit together, but there was something dark under the surface that you would get into a situation or fight, and this would be the person who would unleash fire and fury. Those were the guys that scared me because they were able to mask who they were for most of their lives, and you just wait for it to come out. I have one guy in my life now who is in our fantasy baseball threads, who, if he one night went on a shooting spree, I would not be completely surprised. Not much.
Do you feel pressure to accept his trade offers?
No, not at all. I just stay away from him. He's kind of weird. You know, he's just weird. I stay away from him.
I'm glad you used the word dark because the movie does sort of take a dark turn at this point. And SLC Punk gives us a bit of a head fake because the vibes are all getting a little sketchy, right? We go to this party at Jennifer's house. Jennifer is this teenager. She's beautiful, but she needs to be on her meds. We know at this point she's off her meds on this particular night. Her brother told her to stop taking them. There's a storm brewing, a literal storm brewing over the house. A dude in the basement in like sneakers and like a cape. He's about to summon Satan. He's like, you coming? He's going outside. And I thought for sure all the signals in this movie are telling us that someone's going to die tonight. So Stevo goes down to the basement, and instead we get a scene where he sits down for a talk with Chris. Chris is the brother of Jennifer. And they debate calmly and rationally entropy versus order. And I got to tell you, man, like I didn't realize what a hole I had in my life and something that I missed so very much. I used to spend hours at Ascenza Coffee Shop in Mesa or at Casey Moore's in Tempe, Arizona, sitting around a table with friends and tossing around political theory, right? Communism versus capitalism, philosophy, right? Like nihilism, just general lore in our beliefs. And I thought, like, what happened to that? And I realized that I think we've replaced that with like Twitter. And that shit's performative, man. Like people are trying to score points for anonymous faces who are like liking or upvoting shit. And I think honestly, Big D, that this podcast, our little discussions that we have every week, like I think that's as close as I'll get in life at this point to having serious discussion about topics that matter, even though it's Shat the Movies.
No, I've recently come to that same realization that no longer can you have a normal conversation about anything because people have now made, here's the difference, I think. Back in the day, you could talk about a topic completely independently from whatever your other beliefs are.
Yes.
Today, everyone has a self-defined identity. Politics has become their sole identity. The fact that people run around, regardless left or right, with all merch for a candidate on their car, on their hat, on their truck, anywhere, it's comical to me. You used to support ideas. You used to support a party. You never were like a fan of a team. Now it's like we are entrenched in, I'm a Raider fan and you're a Chiefs fan, and I could never like a Chief. There's no more debating. People just sit around and they try to spew the shit that they've heard. You're not going to convert anybody. It's like you're not on social media. You can't have a conversation because either the people who you agree with will think that you're somehow not being strong enough. The other people will just hate you and think you're ignorant or you're stupid. It's toxic. And it's because social media, you're in the industry. They want interactions. Vanessa loves animals. When she stops interacting with the social media channels, Facebook in particular, or Instagram, they will prod her with stories about abuse of animals. They've now proven that if you and I look at the same post, you will get comments which are meant to provoke you. I will get a different set of comments meant to provoke me. The system now, the world, the way everybody communicates, we're siloed, and I think it's sad. There's no more middle ground. You have your identity and you just take it to the grave with you.
And in real life, there's a chilling effect on conversation too, because I can tell you in the last, let's say 2 weeks, last Sunday, I was at the shooting range, right? Hanging out with my friends, shooting some ARs, shooting some 9mm. And I shot my friend's suppressed AR, which has a massive magazine on it. And I'm hitting targets at like 200, 250 yards. And I'm like, God, this is a beautiful machine. Like, this thing is a joy to fire. It's chambered in 5.56 and it's like butter, dude. And I thought, wow, what a cool fucking, like, I love this gun. But I know that there are certain topics I'm not bringing up at the range. And at the same time, with other friends, I can't talk about how much I love the AR, that it is just it's a wonderful platform, right? Because there's taboo around that. Same as at the Chop Top Challenge, right? There's a bunch of people standing around a fire. I don't know the politics of everybody in the group. And so if I want to have a conversation about any old thing, there's a worry that that opinion that I have is going to be chain linked, like you said, into all these other identity markers, right? And so it fucking sucks, man. It fucking sucks. I miss being able to have these earnest conversations without people jumping to conclusions. And more so, I miss being that person who wouldn't censor himself to avoid upsetting everybody around him.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, at that same party, Bob complains of a headache induced by Spandau Ballet's She Loved Like Diamond playing on a stereo and is giving Percodan, which he's told is vitamins that will help his headache. Bob doesn't take drugs, by the way, folks. The accidental drug overdose kills him in his sleep. At Bob's funeral, Stevo appears with a shaved head and a suit. He plans to go to Harvard and eventually marries Brandy.
So when we meet Brandy, I'm very thankful because I told you I want, you're going to joke about the fact that I need all these characters to learn lessons and I like people to be kept in line and I like discipline, but maybe I do, but I want to see people grow. I want to see people change. I don't like stagnation. And Brandy is introduced and she changes the way that Steve looks. And the character expresses a simple concept that I've tried to convey multiple times with you and Ash that I couldn't do. I would stumble with my words. I could never get you guys to understand it. So she says what I've always tried to say. I always thought subcultures who were trying to be so different, I want to be my own person, would always end up looking alike. That when you get a subgroup that dresses alike, that does the same things, yes, it may be different than the popular culture, but you're all fitting into one image that you're conforming, much like the popular kids did, but I could never convey it. And she does a great job. And she has the conversation. She's sitting with Steve on the couch, and she explains this more eloquently than I ever could. And she says, hey, are you trying to look like a bum? Wouldn't it be more of an act of rebellion if you didn't spend so much time dyeing your hair blue and going out and getting punky clothes that seem so petty? If you want to be an individual, right? Why are you wearing a uniform to look like all the other punks? That's not rebellion. That's fashion. Why don't you go out and try to think differently? You can't create rebellion. It just is. And if you think about all these groups, the goths, the punks, the mods, the metalheads, they all have a uniform that they dress. They all dress alike. They all cut their hair the same way. They're conforming. What's the difference between them or the popular preppy kids wearing Izods and khakis and Dockers? What's the difference?
Brandy is talking out of her ass. Brandy doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about. Okay. The unnamed thing that Brandy is speaking out against is a thing called culture. Culture is defined as the collection of distinctive characteristics that define a society or social group, including their spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and material aspects. Material aspects. Okay. It can also be described as a complex whole of traditional behaviors that are passed down through generations and evolve in response to a changing world. Okay. There is utility to that. And I can tell you that as a goth. Okay. When I see a fellow goth, I'm seeing a person who is making my world a little better by expressing themselves in a manner that is pleasing to my sensibilities. We see each other. We don't look exactly the same, but we see each other. I like spooky stuff. I like the color black. I like Memento Mori. Okay. And there are other people who also like that. And we're signaling to each other that we also have a shared lineage, a shared group of cultural touchstones, whether it's literature, whether it's music, all those things that come along with it. It's an I see you moment, right? Stevo, Bob, and Mike. Okay. Those three, they're all punks. They're part of the hardcore scene in Salt Lake City. Okay. They all look very different. Mike, buttoned up, polo. Bob, mohawk. Stevo, blue hair, kind of wears like suits a lot, suit jackets and stuff. They're doing their own thing. They all look very different. Just like Joy Division, Bauhaus, and Christian Death. Those are all goth bands, but they look very different. They have a totally different aesthetic. And I think that as long as you're part of a culture, right? As long as you are a part of that culture, you have every right to represent it, and you should represent it. Recently, there was a local goth club that in Arizona that tried to institute a dress code. You know what goths did? They balked at that. They said, we're not going there. Why? Because that's not what we're about. We're not about uniformity. We're not about conformity. In fact, the older a goth gets, you know that, how long they've been in the scene, because they start to look a lot more like me. Okay. They're okay wearing a Diamondbacks hat that's purple. They're okay wearing shorts and sandals. They don't give a shit, but they have that cred, and you still know there's something about them that you're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that person's goth.
You see, but it seems that what gets me is that a lot of the angst or the drive, it appears to me as a normie, is I'm not a conformist. I'm not going to dress like the popular kids. I'm different. They're trying to stand out. Yeah. They're trying to stand out, but just pick another group to look like. But they're not doing it independently. They're picking whether I'm going to be a goth, I'm going to be a mod, they're joining a group that's not really independent. They're saying, I'm different. I'm not someone who's just going to fit in. I'm not going to conform. But they're actually choosing to conform to a subgroup.
But that's not conformity. Like conformity is stepping in line, that there's an expectation of you and you're adhering to that expectation, right?
But you started. What was your first in the goth starter kit? What was your first foray into? I'm going to make this my thing. I'm going to...
Yeah, I mean, wearing black, but I was already doing that because I'm Persian. So it was already
leather
part
pants.
of it.
Was it leather pants? Was it eyeliner?
I do like the leather. I can't afford leather. I was always wearing, PVC or vinyl. But point being, though, Big D, is that in the punk scene, okay, you can wear whatever the fuck you want, which is demonstrated in this movie. That's the part Brandy doesn't get. Stevo looks like Stevo. Like, he dresses like Stevo. Nobody else is dressing like Stevo. She's off base.
Okay. I just I think they should be free of judgment, because they judge the UK wearing punks in the mall, and they say, oh, those guys aren't real. Those guys are more like posers, because they're into like the UK scene. London Calling. Oh, that's terrible. You don't make fun of the Smiths. Don't do that. That hurts.
I mean, it is true. Well, it is true though that the British punk fan, like the British punk scene is much more fashion oriented than the American. Like if you think about what are the American, like the hallmarks of American, right? Minor Threat, Black Flag, the Ramones. The Ramones, if you looked at them, you're gonna be like, those are punks, right? It's like long-haired New York guys in jeans and leather jackets. Like they look like rock and roll guys, but they're not adhering to, it was really the Sex Pistols and that whole scene that were like, oh, mohawks and like putting a bunch of studs in your jacket and pins. Yeah, anyway.
They do. They look more like delinquent bikers and less studs and Union Jack. And yeah, I agree. But you don't like Brandy. You think she's off base.
She's not a fine girl.
I think she's exactly what Steve needs.
Okay.
She is exactly the answer. And I've never believed when people say, oh, love at first sight, or I found the one. That's all fucking bullshit. That's in the movies. That doesn't happen. But I think when you find that right person, you kind of know it. You're not like, seeing like sparkles and unicorns and rainbows. When you find a relationship and it fits and you want to make yourself better, you found the one. So many times in relationships, people are like, I'm going to change my partner. I'm going to help them. I'm going to help them become a better person. That doesn't work. You got to want to do it. Steve meets Brandy and he admits, he says, basically, I hated her ideas because she was so critical of me. But that didn't push him off. That attracted him to her, and that made him want to change. When I met Vanessa, I had just gotten out of the Army. I was in great shape. I lived with 2 other guy friends. We had a full bar and kegerator in our apartment. People were coming in and out. I was calling out of work. I was a bit of a man whore. We had girls in the apartment all the time. I mean, it was risque, Gene. If we were going to be judged by a higher, like if one day I had to actually get to the gates of heaven, and they pulled out video, I'm not getting in. There's no chance. It was debauchery. It was what they call it, a sex sandwich.
Yeah.
It was
tongue
sinful.
Sucking.
It was
cheating.
it was very sinful. It was very bad. But I met Vanessa. She was at the pool, and I said, "What are you looking for in a guy?" She said, "Everything you're not." And I was like, "But I'm everybody's type." And immediately I went into the mode where I was going to prove her wrong. And I was saved by her. I became a better person. And I like that Steve doesn't go head over heels. He sees the subtle things in her and makes him question his life. And everybody needs that. Everybody needs that person that makes them want to be better. And if you don't find that person, I feel bad for you. Or you marry somebody who you thought you loved and it turned out not to be. It is nice to find that person who actually has got your back and makes you want to be better.
Listeners out there, if you do ever stumble upon a beautiful Brazilian at the pool at your complex and ask her what she's into and she says everything you're not, there's also a chance that she might be gay. So just consider that. In this case, Big D lucked out. But there's another way to look at this entire sequence, though, Big D, which is Steve-O grew up, discovered he's into monogamy because he saw his girlfriend, not girlfriend, fucking another dude that really pissed him off. And then he met a pretty woman, right? I know Sarah is the right person for me, and she would have been the right person for me at any point in my life, okay? She wouldn't be wrong for me at any point, but I certainly would not have been smart enough or mature enough to see that 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, what was I looking for? Emaciated, pale, goth. Those were the criteria, right? Troubled, reads a lot of painful literature, loves Wuthering Heights. Like that's what I was looking for. And it took trial and error and experience to understand that actually I like a big body and I like a hard ass and I like a person who's going to push me and who is insanely decisive to make up for my indecisiveness and who is insanely impatient to make up for my patience, so that there's some balance struck there. And I'm not talking about opposites attract. We're politically nearly identical. We're both cheapskates and we both love animals. Like there's a lot in common, but you have to find that. You're right. You find that one, but you have to be ready. And I think in Steve-O's case, it was maybe more the moment than the person.
But again, I don't know that he ends up with her, but she triggers in him that maybe he should be going for smarter girls. And like you said, Gene, when we're younger, you go after the looks. When you said, what would you have done 20 years ago? Was the emaciated, the skinny, like light skinned, like goth. When you get older, it's much more important to connect with the person who can challenge you, the one who can drive you mentally And I hope that he, maybe ends up with her. But again, it's not the crux of the movie. He doesn't run off to Harvard with her. And she's like, Daddy got me in too. Let's go. And he conforms. And I just think he's got a better future. And it was nice to see him get out of fucking Salt Lake City.
Also, dudes out there, if you haven't been with like a really strong woman, like I mean physically strong, fucking do it, dude. It's the shit. It's the shit.
Do you wrap your legs around her waist and have her does she carry you to the bed, Gene?
Just pegs me every Tuesday.
Yeah, she just picks you up. She carries you like a baby and sits you down with your mustache.
Well, Big D, earlier in the pod, you mentioned how this movie's structure is all fucked up. And I want to close out by examining the final minutes of this movie. It might be the best example of how fucked up this structure is. Okay. Heroin Bob, he dies. Matthew Lillard, he acts his ass off at the end of this movie. He's mourning his only friend in the world. What am I going to do now? I don't have any friends.
Yeah.
And for those of you with a lot of friends, fucking congratulations. Okay. But life will eventually get lonely. If you live long enough, life will get lonely, and you will have that one friend or your spouse who is the only person that matters to you. Maybe your child. Okay. And if you lose them, like Matthew Lillard taps into that feeling. It hurts, dude. It hurts to watch this scene. And we're moving toward closure on this chapter in Stevo's life. The movie is going to end powerfully. And then suddenly, for some reason, we get a flashback scene. And there's young Stevo and young Bob looking like the lead singer of AC/DC. And they're first discovering punk in the basement. And there's jokes about D&D, and there's jokes about prog rock, and they just strip away the emotional punch of this film. It is such a self-own. It is such an unforced error. It's unforgivable.
Yeah, why not open up with that? Let's see how they are young.
Thank you.
Lead into it. Think about Less Than Zero, right?
Yes.
If at the end they had a flashback to when they do like the picture.
They do actually. They do that.
But they do the picture of the high point of them. They didn't go back to them as kids.
Yeah.
No. And it goes to the funky structure of this entire movie. And I'm glad you mentioned that scene, Gene. I wrote it. We're not saying here that Matthew Lillard was going to get an Oscar, but this performance, he stretched as far as he could. I was thinking this was worth of maybe a Blockbuster or an MTV Movie Award for best dramatic role, but he was better than I expected. Wasn't great, but it was better than I'm dying here.
And on that note, it is time to give our Shat score for SLC Punk. The Shat scores are a way of telling you how many wipes this movie takes to get off your respective butts. 0 wipes is a perfect movie. It's when you didn't sell out, you bought in. And 5 wipes is an absolute disaster in the movie. It's the self-realization that you are nothing more than a goddamn trendy-ass poser. Big D, we'll start with you. What's your wipe score for SLC Punk?
I was not optimistic. I was really worried. And then the movie hooked me. It's the characters, they don't take themselves too serious. It's fun. You can see a bit of your life and your friend group, even though not many of us have grown up this type of life, living in Salt Lake City, bit squalor, violent, beating people up and taking drugs, especially after college. But for a $600,000 budget and the cast is full of people who you would recognize today. Jason Segel, we talk about Christopher McDonald. The cast is better than they deserve. And I think the movie, is it great? No, but it's 2.5 wipes for me. I can't give it any worse than average. I don't know if I'd see it again, but I didn't hate it. I'd say 2.5 wipes.
I think you, James, and I are all on the same page here because I'm coming in at 2.5 wipes as well. And it's not to say that this is a perfectly average movie, but it is a perfectly average wipe score. I agree with you, Big D. The structure was a bit odd, a bit amateurish. It could have been sequenced a little bit better. But beyond that, the comedy angle of this movie, I thought this was a very, very funny movie when I was a kid that also represented a lot of the world that I knew. And as I got older, it's not that I stopped laughing, but rather the jokes just don't hit as well. It's not as cool or slick as I might have thought it was. However, that representation of a snapshot in time and the reality of these characters and these subcultures still rings true to me. And so for that, I do appreciate the movie. So that gives us a unanimous wipe score of 2.5 wipes.
And Gene, I like the fact that it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's not so self-important and trying to lecture to us. And the movie that I was thinking to compare it with just happens to be tied with this. So with a score of 2.5 wipes, that now ties this in the 216 spot with some very similar films. Empire Records, Romper Stomper, That Thing You Do, and Taps. So I think that at least the first two, Angsty Kids, you got the Punk and Romper Stomper. I think it's where it belongs. I think it's perfectly serviceable.
I think it's a special treat to the listeners. What we should do is when we release this episode, we should post some of our photos from this era.
Oh, wow.
Maybe you, some of your new wave photos, you got those. I'll try to post as many of the guys that I mentioned in this podcast. I think it'd be really, really fun to see that era of life. It was a good time.
Gene, I told you, I mentioned this once before, that I was reading my quotes from my senior yearbook. They were all like Morrissey, like lines that it's like life is hard enough when you belong here. Shit like that. What was I thinking?
You were awesome. What happened?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
You were awesome.
You were awesome.
I was pining to be loved, Gene. That's what I was.
Yeah.
And once I got the love, then I became hardened and I became an asshole.
All right. Well, on that note, Big D, what do we have coming up next week?
Gene, next week, British gangster George and his hapless aide Ken draft a pair of arrogant American grifters for a massive diamond heist. When the job goes badly, Ken repeatedly attempts to kill an elderly woman who witnessed the robbery. Commissioned by John S., came out in 1988. It's iconic, but I do not remember the film itself.
I feel like this is a hilarious movie that was plagued by a terrible title. What a terrible title. But God, it is so goddamn funny. I'm really excited about this one. So big thank you to John S. for commissioning this movie. Thank you to James for commissioning SLC Punk and the upcoming Street Fighter. Thank you to all the commissioners who make this podcast possible. That concludes this week's episode of Shat the Movies. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat the Movies. Email us, host@shatpod.com. Support the podcast by shopping our Amazon affiliate link, buying our merch, or by commissioning your own movie. Find all information by visiting our website, shatpod.com. Also, check out our sister podcast, Shat on TV, where we review TV series such as Lovecraft Country, Westworld, True Detective, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, and Watchmen. Find all the information on our website, shatpod.com/TV, wherever fine podcasts be found, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. It helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-host, Big D, I'm Gene Lyons. Join us next time for the following movie.
Otto is a man of many talents.
Hey, great fish. Oh, a little squeeze of lemon, some tartar sauce.
Ken is a man of few words.
Tell him from me.
George is the man with the plan.
13 millions, my friends.
And Wanda
Do you speak Italian?
Molto pericolosa.
is the woman they love. They all set out to commit the perfect crime.
To 20 million.
To a job well done.
But it turned into something
George moved the loot?
less than perfect.
Disappointed!
So they turned to a lawyer named
Archie Leash.
Leech. George is going to tell him what the diamonds are.
with Wanda as the bait.
I want you to make love with me.
Pop.
Nothing.
He's really hooked.
I thought you weren't jealous.
I'm not. I don't believe in jealousy. It's for the weak.
Come a girl as bright as you can have a brother who's so...
Don't call me stupid.
I'm really sorry. I apologize unreservedly.
Are you totally deranged?
You're afraid so, old chap.
John Cleese,
Will you leave immediately, please?
Jamie Lee Curtis,
Kiss me there.
Kevin Kline,
Put the other one up.
Michael Palin,
May I kiss you, Ken?
No, you can't!
a fish called Wanda. A smashing
Oh, dear.
comedy.
And each week we take a look back in time, decide if our favorite films still hold up. Then you know what you should do. I can't believe I'm going to ask you this.
I was going to say the sex and what was the first line?
I thought you were going to give me Anarchy in the UK.
Oh, no. No, I was looking for what's the first song? It's like...
Sex and violence.
Yeah.
Sex and violence.
Sex and violence.
Sex and violence.
Yeah, I was going to.
I am one of your hosts, Gene Lyons. Alongside is my co-host, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.